Hello, this is Evan Rogerson, and I'm Motorgang here, and today I'm going to be breaking down the RECF Town Hall, which recently dropped earlier today, as the time of recording, about an hour and 20 minutes ago. So this is basically just where Dan Mance, who's the CEO of RECF, and RECF are the people who host the robotics competitions, and then Bailey, who works for Vex. Vex are the people who make the parts for the competitions, like the brain and like your C channels and stuff. He's the current one of the top people on the GDC, and they kind of went through, answered some questions from the community. This is less so related like to the official Q&A from the game manual, so they're not like asking things like, "Hey, is it legal to blah blah blah?" It's more like future of the program things, like what's the plan for Vex Worlds, that sort of thing. So let me just pull up my notes here. I'm essentially going to break it down. The video is about an hour and a bit long. I'll have it linked in the description if you want to go watch it yourself, along with the time codes to all the things as I'm speaking them. But basically, this is just going to be a super condensed version if you don't want to listen through all that. And as my game manual videos have shown, people like to listen to me yap about robotics. All right, so leave a comment and like the video to please the YouTube algorithm, and let's get into it. So first of all, this is timestamp 3:15. In the video, they announced, well, we announced these were already publicly available, but I'm sure plenty of people that don't already know this, the specific dates for Vex Worlds. So Vex Worlds is going to be in Dallas again this year. This is the last year they have a contract with the city of Dallas, so it most likely will not be there next year. And the dates for that are May 6th through May 14th, and it goes high school, then middle school JROTC VEXU, and then IQ. So high school will be 6, 7, 8, and that is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then middle school JROTC and VEXU will be Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then IQ, which will be both elementary school and middle school, will be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Additionally, another change that they've made is if you've been responsible for booking, Vex has sort of a block booking thing called Team Travel Source. Before, it was highly recommended that teams booked through this, and this year they said it will be required for teams to book through Team Travel Source. They said that there would be a couple of exceptions, but mostly that's what they want to do, and that is for the purpose of rebates. The city of Dallas will give them money because tons of people are coming in, helps out the local economy, and they said that they barely qualified for those rebates last year. They did say that they're going to be increasing the options that are available for Team Travel Source, but they didn't give a whole lot of specifics on that, just more details, things like hotels with breakfast, hotels without. They were pretty scant on the details. Not personally sure how to feel about this. Sorry, just had to get some milk there. So, I mean, I think it's good that RECF will be able to get more rebates from the city of Dallas, which will hopefully like be able to make Worlds less expensive in the future and lower costs back onto the teams. They did say that all the money from this will go back to helping the teams out. However, it does significantly limit options. I know last year, because I was 18 and in college, hotels make it really awkward to book things when you're just 18 years old. So I know for VEXU, this is probably one of the hardest hit demographics. And then for people on budgets, like they said, if you won't really be able to stay in hotels if you're in the Dallas Fort Worth area. So definitely going to limit stuff. I don't know how people were really doing that in the past, but I know this wouldn't necessarily affect me most of the times I've gone, but last year it could have been a little bit tricky, and I know some VEXU teams like to stay in Airbnbs. Um, so overall, that's pretty much that. Then the next thing I talked about in the timestamp for this is 6 minutes and 4 seconds was AP testing. So as I'm sure you realized, if you're taking any AP courses or international bachelorette, Worlds does conflict with the AP testing. They said that based on the dates that they booked the venues about 3 years ago, that that was completely unavoidable. And they said that when they reached out to coaches, they would prefer to have the testing. I mean, they would prefer to have Vex Worlds hosted during the middle of the week because, as I said earlier, high school is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So apparently that's what coaches wanted. Personally, I enjoy as a college student it being Friday, Saturday, Sunday, as I'm not going to have to miss any school actually other than driving time in order to go to Worlds. But theoretically, I don't have to miss any school, so I think that's nice. And I know a lot of the high school people that I talked to were not happy about essentially, I mean, if it's Tuesday through Thursday, most teams are going to need a travel day before and a travel day after. So essentially, you're missing an entire week of school in the middle of May, which is not good for testing, both AP wise and just regular school testing. They did say that they will have testing sites offered for certain tests at the World's venue, and then, of course, it will be excused for makeups. So that's basically that. Then at timestamp 9:37, they talked about online challenges. So basically, you can do online challenges. They're just sort of random things. Some of them can give you world squalls. Some of them can give you um, discounts on, or no, gift cards for things on Vex.com. And basically, they're random things, like some of them are CAD challenges or making videos. They said the new one this year was a marketing challenge, which business majors out there, certain business major might enjoy that. Um, but yeah, that's basically it. If you've already done these before, you kind of know what they are, and most teams just ignore them. But I recommend checking them out. There are some interesting ones this year, and they close, I believe, January 26th, but don't quote me on that. Then the next thing, which is at 10:39, they talked about awards, specifically judged awards, and then specifically the Innovate Award. They said that the feedback last year was positive regarding the changes made to the Innovate Award, which, if you're not familiar, Innovate now actually rewards you having an innovative design. And Spin Up in prior seasons, Innovate Award had nothing to do with the innovation on the robot, and Innovate requires a form to get the award. The number of stories I have heard from people about not handing out the Innovate Award because nobody filled out the form is quite frankly ridiculous. So fill out the Innovate form, because that's what RECF wants, and that's also part of their thing about trying to like reduce hole counting and mentor built robots is documenting that in your engineering notebook and ensuring that you're coming up with unique designs just to try and reward people doing those off meta things and not just copying other things they see. At 13:15, we have an ad for Pits and Parts. Um, Not much to say there. Then 16:14, they talked about how this was the beginning of the Q&A, and SG9, there was somebody asking like this typical like, hey, what constitutes climbing, which is answered in a Q&A that it's grasping onto the ladder. You do not have to be off the ground. But they basically said that, yeah, the game manual says that the only official source is the game manual and the Q&A. So nothing in this can be official, so they're not even going to bother asking those things. Just ask any of your rule-related questions in the Q&A. Next up was a question, I didn't get the timestamp for this, but if the GDC was considering any changes to scoring, and Bailey, who is one of the heads of the GDC, said that they're not planning to make any changes currently. They're happy with the game is. I mean, they'll see how it evolves, and they might make some changes later, but currently they're happy with the way the game is being scored. At 22:30, they talked about some of the inspiration for their past games, which, yes, they do take inspiration from some sports, but basically they said they just went through the design process. They brainstorm up a bunch of things. They do testing. Um, they have like interns build test robots for them, which interning at Vex sounds fun until you get like physically assaulted in the hallways after hours. Um, but yeah, that's basically that. Then at 24:25, they talked about 3D printing, which, if you've been in the Vex robotics community for any amount of time, you are aware that 3D printing as a discussion in VRC is a dead horse, and people just keep beating it. 3D printing is not legal for functional parts. You can use it for decorations. RECF and Vex have zero intentions of making it legal currently, and the reasoning for that is Vex right now is a closed system environment. So basically, there is a set amount of parts and options that you can buy, and yes, certain teams do have bigger budgets. Certain teams are going to be able to afford to buy 500 sensors or whatever, and certain teams are going to be stuck using the starter kit, but overall it helps lower the playing field and stop things from getting crazy expensive, like first, where your registration fee for competitions are more than the budget for most teams VRC for a season. However, I mean, there are some open system things. If you really want to get involved in like the custom manufacturing, your real house for that is going to be custom plastics and like using a CNC machine. That's really your biggest open source thing is plastic, and you can do some fancy stuff, especially if you're willing to buy more expensive plastics like Peak, which is a really fancy plastic. I know someone who machined a swerve drive VRC legal using that stuff, which does kind of defeat the point of it being a closed system because you can go crazy with custom plastic stuff, but overall it's definitely a lot more constrained than something like First or even VEXU. And I do think it's overall a good thing for the system not to have this sort of thing legal, because like with VEXU, there's so many more options. Pretty much the only thing you're restricted on is your motors, and there's just so many options, and it adds a ton of extra complexity that I don't think VRC in particular needs. Like today we were looking at pneumatics, and there are a bazillion pneumatics components, and a lot of the websites and stuff are not very user friendly. And for middle schoolers and stuff, that's not some rabbit hole that they need to be going down. At least in my opinion, if you do want to start getting again custom plastics, or go compete in Vex AI, which I'll kind of get to in a little bit later. 26:35, VEXU stuff at Worlds. They are planning to add like career fairs and other ways for VEXU teams to get connected. at future Vex Worlds events, but probably not this one. At 30:35, they talked about custom motor cartridges for VEXU. So in spin up, teams wanted to use 3,600 RPM cartridges, which basically, if you're not already aware, the internal motor spins at 3,600 RPM, and it has an internal planetary gearbox to gear it down for speed. So like your blue motors have an internal 6-to-1 ratio, your red motors have an internal 36-to-1 ratio. So teams were just running them without a cartridge, and they made it illegal for VRC. Although this VEXU teams would be doing this for quite some time before, they said they'd have no plans to making it legal simply for warranty reasons because it adds extra risk of parts getting damaged, which I get, but it is kind of frustrating that something used to be legal and then the VRC kids came along and ruined it. Um, Another thing was learning goals for VEXU. This was at 32:27. So in VEXU, one of the more controversial things is machining parts. You can machine any part you want, and it's kind of awkward because I know this is specifically an issue at KU and a ton of other universities of the university has access to like all these fancy machining stuff, but they don't give the students access to use it at most universities. So most teams just can't get access to this custom aluminum stuff, or they can't just machine it out their entire half of their chassis, which some VEXU teams can, some VEXU teams don't. And it is currently illegal for you to use a service like SendCut Send for somebody else to cut a design that you have already made in like CAD or something. And the reasoning on this was really shaky. Basically, they said it was the same argument as 3D printing, which doesn't work considering VEXU is an open system. And some teams have access to resources like machine shops. Other teams don't have access to resources machine shops, but almost everybody universally would have access to a service like SendCut Send. At least it would be a lot more equal and fair than just doing something like it is now with just if you have a machine, go for it. If you don't, too bad, you're screwed. So their reasoning on that was pretty shaky, but they didn't really show any plans for changing that. Interesting question was how do they manufacture the triangle PVC pipes for the ladder? And basically they said they just have like a mold that they run the hot plastic through, and instead of it being circular shaped, it's triangle shaped. Another question was for Dan Mance what his favorite non-Vex Worlds event was, and his answer was pretty vague. He said he enjoyed AI competitions, the Vex Go classroom competitions, the girl-powered workshop out in California, and then just signature events in general. Another question was, what is the process for updating games? And basically, Bailey said that this was just they go through, they look at the game, they see if it's being played ways they expect, and then if there are problems, they said that they have four stakeholders that they really have to keep happy. That being students, coaches, event partners, and referees. And you can't do one thing that helps one person if it makes things really, really awkward for other people. Like as an example, they used was the tape lines here. It was really hard for referees to be able to count if a mobile goal was scored, especially with the whole like 10-second thing. It's much easier now that the corners are triangles. If you ever played at like MOA or one of the other early season events with the squares, it was really, really hard to know what it was. And they said that that kind of just helps make it easier for referees without really at the cost of students because strategically it still plays the same. And then of course they can't go and like make all the event partners mad by requiring like new parts mid-season. I know last year like they took off the yellow caps from the poles, but they can't require you to put like a yellow cap on it because then that would require extra parts and that would make the event partners not very happy. Next question is Wi-Fi at Worlds pits. So if you've been to Worlds, you will know that there's no Wi-Fi in the pits. Um, and they said they don't really have plans to do that, at least for the current venue, simply because it's already a big connection issue. Like if you've been to Worlds, just robots are constantly disconnecting in the pit areas because there's so many signals going on, and they don't want to add Wi-Fi as more signals to cause more issues there. Next question, 4110. This was Vex IQ live scoring, so I assume most of you guys are VRC people. Basically, the IQ game this year has live scoring, which means you score. It's kind of like most sports are. I mean, there's a like goal thing in IQ, and you put the ball in, and then a max loader is allowed to grab the ball out and put it back on the field. And essentially, you get points by continually putting it through this goal. And the referee has to count how many times it goes through in order for the score to be accurate. And I'm sure we've all been to an event with a referee who can't count at the end of the match. So the question was, will there be any plans to introduce like match replays or something to make sure? Because I'm sure there either already have been or there will be cases of a referee miscounts a score by 1 point and somebody loses as a result of it. So basically, can we do match replays? And Dan's response basically was, we don't have any plans to do this at the moment. I mean, maybe in the future at some point in time, but RECF's number one priority is not finding out the best robot is. And again, kind of like I talked about earlier with the stakeholders, it puts a lot of extra burden on like the event partners and the referees to have to go and introduce match replays, which personally I disagree with, because at event regions championships and other worlds qualifying events and worlds itself, most events already have official live streams. And basically, they feel like that would be an unnecessary burden and it would increase delays, so they're not going to do that. Next thing was 4427, diversifying robot designs, because somebody was basically saying, do you have any plans to like stop metabots from converging? Which, I mean, last year you very much had a metabot spin up. You kind of had differences. I mean, you had catapult versus flywheel, and we all knew the true winner was slingshot there. But basically, RECS plan is basically just things with judged awards. Like they already talked about how they changed the Innovate Award to better reward innovation and originality, and that's basically their plan because Innovate can qualify you for your state and world championship, and if you push hard for Innovate, you're going to be a top contender for design anyway, which almost all regions will qualify you for worlds and state. 4938, they talked about where Worlds 2026 will be held. They said they will announce that at Vex Worlds 2025. They probably already have their venue booked or at least finalizing it just because of how long these things in advance are booked. So if you really want to, I'm sure you could snoop around and find some results somewhere hidden away with a bunch of conference centers across the US because basically they have to host it in the US because you can't ask, it's VRC is about 85% in the US and you can't expect all those people to get passports when only about 50% of Americans have passports, and it would add a bunch of cost, and then there's only a few convention centers in the world that are actually big enough. Next thing is at 5015, which is V6. When is V6 coming? Bailey basically said they don't know. I mean, they haven't even finished all their promises for V5. Like, maybe I'll put up the thing, but like V5, when it was originally announced, had a ton of features that have still yet to be implemented, and it's been like 5-6 years now. Like, theoretically, you're supposed to be able to I mean, currently you have timed run where it'll just do like a 15-second autonomous and then a 1 minute and 45 driver control, but it's not synced. Originally, one of the promised features was you would be able to connect with 3 other controllers and just run a match off of the controllers without any field control. Haven't done anything like that, but basically, I think by saying that they don't have plans for V6 or they don't know when it's coming out, it's probably not close to coming out, so I wouldn't worry about that anytime soon. Next question, 5141, what is the end goal for Vex AI? Basically, this kind of said it was more of a capstone thing for like seniors in high school or other upper level classmen people just to really stretch the limits of what they can do. And I think, yeah, this kind of ties back in with the 3D printing stuff. If you really, really want to 3D print, go do Vex AI because it follows the VEXU rule set. Um, Next up, April tags on field elements. So for the people who aren't aware, April tags are essentially they're a data storage thing, kind of like QR codes is probably the easiest way to put them, that cameras can easily pick up. So you could essentially like slap an April tag on something and then the camera can scan it, and this can be like, oh, this is the ball that starts at the coordinate 2548. I believe FRC uses them and they can help you do some more advanced autonomous stuff. The GEC said they were currently working on implementing that. 5540, they talked about cost for Vex Worlds. Basically, they said they are working on some scholarships or grants or whatever you want to call them. And they do have some up on their website, grants, RECF or whatever. And you can go there. They do have some restrictions, like if you do get some of these grants, you can't go to, I believe it's more than 2 signature events. And then also just independent fundraising, and reach out to your RSM, which is your regional support manager, as they'll probably be able to better put you in contact with local businesses that specifically do sponsorships for that sort of thing. Next up, 5631 was different AWP criteria at signature events and event region championships. So the autonomous win point criteria are different at Worlds qualifying events this year, which I think is really good, and they kind of emphasized this in the town hall. Basically, I believe at over under you had some divisions at Worlds that were getting over a 90% AWP rate, which at that point it's more of a punishment if you don't get AWP than a reward if you do get AWP. It's kind of like Syndrome and Incredibles. If everyone's super and nobody is. And then on the flip side of the coin, I mean, you have things like the VEXU AWP last year, which for some reason they made it unreasonably challenging. My team only got one AWP all of last year, and BLR's two, who won Worlds, only got one AWP all last year. It was ridiculously hard. Um, so basically, they want to strike a balance of that. I mean, you're gonna have random middle school local tournaments that two or three robots have an autonomous, and if somebody does manage to get AWP, that should be hugely rewarded. But then on the flip side of the thing, you're gonna have signature events where you don't want it to just punish the bad teams there. So it's more of striking the balance of like making sure that AWP is at whatever percentage they have set that they ideally would like it to be. Finally, they said at 1 hour, 1 minute, 24 seconds, mobile goals will be sold separately at some point in time in the future. I know this, especially for teams on tighter budgets, have been wanting to buy specifically mobile goals. Because, I mean, if you have a mobile goal and a few rings, you can pretty much build a robot for everything but hang and wall stakes, but those aren't even the most important aspects of the game anyway. And they did say they would kind of keep this mindset going into future games of being able to individually buy separate field elements. Um, so that'll probably be good. I mean, I imagine it would be similar things to like an over under would really just be triballs. Maybe spin up, you'd be able to buy a roller separately, something like that. Basically, just so you don't have to spend like $600 on game elements. So I think that pretty much wraps everything up. Um, it's about a third of the length of the actual video. If you want to go watch it, link is in the description. And again, if you have any questions, just feel free to comment those down below, and I will see you in the next one.